Hey there, friends. Welcome to today's devotional. It's Psalm 79. O God, the nations have come into your inheritance, and they have defiled your holy temple. They have laid Jerusalem in ruins. They have given the bodies of your servants to the birds of the air for food, the flesh of your faithful to the wild animals of the earth. They poured out their blood like water all around Jerusalem, and there was no one to bury them. We have become a taunt to our neighbors, mocked and derided by those around us. How long, O Lord? Will you be angry forever? Will your jealous wrath burn like fire? Pour out your anger on the nations that do not know you and on the kingdoms that do not call on your name. For they have devoured Jacob and laid waste his habitation. Do not remember against us the iniquities of our ancestors. Let your compassion come speedily to meet us. For we are brought very low. Help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of your name. Deliver us and forgive our sins for your name's sake. Why should the nations say, where is their God? Let the avenging of the outpoured blood of your servants be known among the nations before our eyes. Let the groans of the prisoners come before you. According to your great power, preserve those doomed to die. Return sevenfold into the bosom of our neighbors the taunts with which they taunted you, O Lord. Then your people, the flock of your pasture, will give thanks to you forever, from generation to generation. We will recount your praise. So this is a psalm that is speaking to a specific circumstance. That's something that's happened in the life of the people of Israel. And it's fairly clear that this has to do with the destruction of the temple of Babylon, or temple in Jerusalem, by the Babylonians. So this was one of the most significant moments in the life of the people of Israel. And this happened in about 587 BC, when God used the Babylonian army and the Babylonian king to destroy the people, to destroy Jerusalem, the temple, and to take the people into exile. And this wasn't something that came without warning, and there was purpose in it. God was acting on his own sovereign will, because the people of Jerusalem had they had begun to worship false gods. They were guilty of all kinds of transgressions. Of course, you've heard that the history of the people of Israel, that's the pattern. And God sent prophets to warn them about it, to tell them to stop, and if they didn't, that Jerusalem would be sacked, would be laid in ruins, and they'd be taken into exile. But they didn't listen, and eventually it came to pass. And at first, I'm certain that the people of Israel were wondering, sort of as this psalm indicates, why God would abandon them and let another nation come into the city and into the temple and destroy it. He was, after all, their God, and then promised to protect them and provide for them and be their God and bless them. But of course, with the covenant, there were some things that were expected of the people of Israel that they failed to live up to. But at first, they didn't quite understand why God was doing this. They didn't accept the blame for what had happened to them. They essentially blamed God on it. And you get this from some of the prophetic books like Jeremiah and Isaiah. God let them stay in exile for over 70 years, and they cried out to him continually, though they did integrate and assimilate to the Babylonian culture, because through the prophet Jeremiah, God told them to do that. But they still cried out to God and wondered why he was waiting, and why it was taking him so long, and why he was allowing these other nations to think that they had overtaken their God. And there was purpose in it. Again, the purpose was to, well, in our most basic terminology, put them in a timeout so they could realize what they had done wrong and hopefully return and be better for it. In this instance, this is something that God actually did specifically to the people of Israel for a specific purpose. But terrible things happen in our world and in our lives all the time, and we certainly cry out to God and wonder, when will this end, and why are you allowing this to continue, and why won't you stop this or change this or correct it or do whatever it is that we wish to do. And most often, and almost overwhelmingly in the case of situations in our lives, God's not causing those things to accomplish something in us, but very much, as you've probably heard me say before, God is working in the midst of those things and taking some of the worst circumstances and events in our lives and using them for something that could be beneficial or good for us. I talked about this a little while ago, but just thinking back on what's happened over the last 3 months with COVID and how on edge and anxious I think most, if not all of us, were when self quarantining happened and stay at home orders happened and everything in our world stopped. And what was going to happen in the future was uncertain, and how we were going to live with the patterns and the customs and the rituals and routines of our lives had been completely disrupted. But think back over the last 3 months, and have you seen signs of positivity? Things that have turned out to be very good in this instance. And then I think we can attribute most of those things to God. I know in my own life, it has certainly brought me closer to my family. My wife and my son have spent so much more time together, time that was valuable and precious to me prior to this, but something that was sometimes secondary to the obligations of being a pastor and having a job and other things that happen in life. And it has given me such a greater appreciation for my family, but for so many other things, the freedoms that we enjoy, the ability to be out in public and go to restaurants and do whatever it is that we want, things that I took for granted that were truly blessings from God that have been withheld because of the pandemic. So when we ever come out of this, I would venture to guess and hope that I'll have a different perspective on myself, on life, my family, and the things that are important to me, not just the doings of life. And so think about what has changed in your life. How have you seen things that have come out of it that have been very, very good? Yes, we're still uncomfortable and we're still being, routines still being interrupted, but how has your life changed for the better? Think about that and reflect on that and give thanks to God for it, because in the midst of a trial, something like the Israelites faced, but obviously not quite as traumatic, but something quite difficult in our lives, God is still present and working in those things. Focus on those things instead of the things that we don't have and on the goodness of God. Until tomorrow, in Psalm 80, blessings to you all.